Hello. Hi. If everyone could start taking their seats, that would be wonderful.
Okay, what's the order? Yeah, I'm last, yeah. So you want to see us in that order? One.
I don't think it really matters because some people want to show slides.
Okay.
Fill everybody
We're going to get started with our final session just as soon as we can. Great, thank you. And following the session, I just wanted to let everyone know there'll be a short reception. The theater and dance department, Beth, is going to come up and talk to you about that right beforehand, and it's going to be just right outside, 5:30.
Everybody's going to come to the podium, and some people will be leaving slides. So.
Okay, we'll go ahead and begin session 11. This is the final session of the day, the Way Forward and the World Energy Justice Program. The chair of this session is the Honorable John Zabrowski, mediator and arbitrator, and formerly a member of the California Court of Appeals. Thank you. Enjoy.
Well, good afternoon. We're about to begin session 11. Now, this is intended to be a wrap-up and sort of a call to action on all we've been hearing in this excellent conference today. The Way Forward and the World Energy Justice Program. Now, as you can see, we have 7 speakers here. Each one of these speakers is prepared to talk to you for 3 hours. And if you look at their bios and your program materials, you'll see that each one of them would be able to talk to us for 3 hours. But we don't have 3 hours, we only have 1 hour and 15 minutes. So unfortunately, each speaker will be allotted 8 minutes. Now, each has a lot more to say than can possibly be said in 8 minutes, but I'm hoping that most, if not all of them, will be around later for pizza and beer, and you'll be able to continue your conversations with them at that time. Now, since time is short, I'm not going to give a detailed introduction for each speaker. I am going to ask you to look in your program materials where there is a bio for each speaker. And so as we go through this process, I want to hear papers shuffling as you're looking at the bio for that speaker, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the introduction, so we can spend more time listening to them make their comments. So without further ado, I will introduce the first speaker. And our first speaker is Jonah Levine. Jonah's employed by the Biochar Engineering Corporation as well as by CEAS, and as you might expect, he does work on biochar among a number of other things. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Jonah Levine.
shouldn't be clapping yet. I could be a complete failure. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about biochar. I should say I actually don't work for biochar engineering yet, but I will in a week and a half. I have a dual appointment between electrical engineering here at the university and the School of Law at the Center for Energy and Environmental Security. And then next week, it'll be Center for Energy, Environmental Security, and Biochar Engineering. So I just have a few slides on biochar. Many of you probably have not heard the word biochar before, so I just hope it's a basic introduction to the topic. So biochar producing cook stoves, food, energy, and environmental security. The best thing that I can do on the topic of biochar and CEAS can do on the topic of biochar is get folks in touch with the right information and the right people at the right time. So questions, comments, concerns, use my email, and we'll try to link you up with the right people. So biochar. The idea of biochar is we want to take young carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the ground and sequester it. During that process, we want to provide energy, and we want to encourage better agriculture. In the context of this community, we're mostly interested in cook stoves. So what are we talking about? We're going to take biomass and waste biomass, so like this tree limb here, we're going to pyrolyze it, so combustion in an oxygen-limited environment, and we're going to drive hydrogen, nitrogen, and water out of this biomass, and at the end of the process, if we use this branch, we would get about this much char. And I'm going to pass these around. Check them out. This isn't case fir. It's more like the natural char you would get from wild oats or whatever. And if we put that char into an agricultural situation, we can consider it sequestered. And I hope to get a few questions about that. And it can increase water holding capacity, cation exchange, and increase your yield of crops. Well, the process of pyrolysis is going to provide heat, and we can cook on it. Well, I said it's going to sequester carbon. So the carbon you're looking at that's getting passed around in jars, we're going to put into the earth, and how do we know that it's going to stay there? Two soil types, Terra preta and Terra mulata, have been identified over long periods of time in lots of research in Amazonian regions. And there's three pictures here. The one in the center is Terra mulata, the other two are Terra preta, and we know these cultures, these peoples were sequestering these carbon between about 4,000 years before present and about 1,500 years before present, and that carbon still exists in these soils today. And we also know when we look at those soils, they're more agriculturally productive than any of the neighboring soils. And it increased they were able to sustain larger populations. Because the populations were larger, we're assuming that they were healthier, they were eating better. And it was because of the carbon in other parts within the carbon within their soil. So here's a series of different stoves, gasifiers or pyrolyzers that produce char. And along with all of the great cook stoves we've been hearing about that are going to direct more heat, have fuller combustion, clean up indoor air quality, we hope that these stoves are going to do all of those things. But instead of taking the biomass, instead of taking my tree here and turning it into a pile of ash, we're going to leave some solid carbon that we're going to put back into the soil. The stove this clay stove here is being developed at Cornell. This is a Generation 2 design. They want to go up to probably a Generation 5 design before they start disseminating it. And they really don't like me showing the pictures of it. But they've been running the stoves in Kenya and seeing good results, and they've been seeing also nice ag results from their chars. And Cornell is doing a great job. The next stove over that you see is made by a company called World Stove, and Nathaniel Mulcahy is the primary person behind that stove in that company. And Nathaniel, beyond being just a really great person, is a marvelous engineer, and his stove is producing, I think, about 30% by weight char from biomass put in, and Nathaniel is working on some very creative ideas to scale up production and dissemination of his stove, and I'm not going to say much more about his stove than that, but if you go online and you go to the web link, worldstove.com, you can see a number of different products that World Stove is building, and of all the stoves up here in pictures, Nathaniel is probably closest to market ready. There's a general type of stove called a retort, and it can produce char and it can cook. And Terra Preta Pot is an organization making one of these out of clay, and it likely needs more work and development. We need to get these stoves into labs like Professor Wilson's and make sure that we're meeting technology development efforts, but that's another type of stove. And a T-LUD gasifier is another type of stove on the market that can produce char, as well as the other benefits we've been talking about with cook stoves. So agricultural production, we're trying to link this space of ag and energy here, and I think the most difficult questions to answer about biochar are what type of ag benefit do I really get from the char? And it depends on the char you produce. And it depends on the soil into which you're putting the char. So the best I can do to answer that question is to give a few examples. So there's two examples here. The example that's probably more interesting to this community is this example from Cameroon. And it was overwhelmingly positive. So the picture of the corn crop there in the upper right, on the far left-hand side of that plot, there was no char, and in the far right-hand side of the plot, there was char, and all that corn was planted at the same time. They saw earlier germination, heavier seeding, larger total grain crops, and these types of field trials are being done in a number of countries right now. I could probably list 10 or 15 different field trials going on right now. And they are not all as positive as Cameroon, but I would say on the whole they are positive, and it's adding nicely to agricultural production, as well as providing cook stoves and larger processes like kilns in communities. The lower right-hand picture is a picture of a greenhouse trial we did here at CU, where we grew radishes in a greenhouse with char produced at NREL, and we saw earlier germination and heavier fruiting from our char plants than our non-char plants. So there's a number of next steps, a huge amount of work that should need to get done, but I would hope to encourage this community who's so interested in stoves and energy applications to look at char production at the same time, sustainability standards around that char production, and how can we approach this concept of agricultural production and energy application at the same time. I think biochar is a way forward.
Well, thank you, Jonah. That was a lot of content for 8 minutes, and I know some of you may have questions. I'm asking you to make a note of any question you have, and when we finish with our other speakers, we'll have a question and answer session at that time. I'm now going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Jose Ambrozic. Jose is a native of Lima, Peru, and he is now the director of the Camp St. Malo Catholic Retreat Center. Jose?
See if I can get in. I guess my time is not running yet. Okay, we're all here with a purpose, and that is to effect change. And I'm going to take something very, well, a little unusual in respect to the other presentations I'm hearing. So, in a sense, part of the reason was we were sharing with Dr. Lakshman some time ago about the language of rights and duties that is normally used to in this context, and say, okay, is there something beyond duty, something beyond rights that we can use to motivate change? I'm involved in CREATIO, which holds discussions on environmental issues here in the US. We take medical missions, college students missions to communities in South America. And we have a university, technology school, about 7,000 students in both. We're heavily involved in regional development and in social projects. But I'm not going to talk about any of that. What I'm going to talk is what is the motivation for that? And so, as we were saying, we were talking with Dr. Lashman about John Rawls. And John Rawls argues that developed peoples must come in aid of peoples in need. He talks about the veil of ignorance, and he talks about fairness, which are other ways of expressing what we might know as the golden rule found in the gospel. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Now, Rawls is criticized because this duty of assisting poor people is not supported by his theory founded on social contract. And that's right. It's not founded on that. However, we can see that beyond his call of well-ordered people to support burdened societies, he goes even further out on the limb when he says that through cooperation, peoples develop care and affinity for each other, going beyond self-interest to mutual concern for each other's way of life and culture, even willing to make sacrifices for each other. I think this is way beyond social contract. But obviously, John Rawls is onto something, even if it's not within the framework of a theory. So, faith in the Western traditions has always defended the dignity of the human person and the right that it has for what is true and good. Now, social ethics are founded on the nature of the human person. The human person, modeled in the image and likeness of God, who is love, has love at the core of its identity and vocation. The human person is only fulfilled in love. So only the human person can rise above instincts, self-preservation, self-interest. Only the human person can choose to love, to give up anything for the good of others, to take on suffering and even death for the love and benefit of others. Now, this capacity of conscious and free self-denial for the sake of others is something that the human person shares with the divine. Now, this is the source of its dignity. This capacity of a human person to reach out and transcend itself is also what gives the human person the creativity, the depth, the richness that we can find in any human person. So that's why each and every human person is a treasure worthy of love, of respect, of care. And it's interesting. Recently, I was fortunate enough to hear Professor Amadei speak very inspiringly and forcefully of the divine that can be found in every human person. In a sense, sharing how the divine that can be found in every human person is what inspires him in his work. So, let's paraphrase Pascal's wager. And if God might exist and be present in every human person, if he might be in every human person, even in ourselves, would it be a risk worth taking to ignore it, to be unaware of it, to scorn it, to demean it? So recognizing the presence, the foundation of the dignity of every human person is what has energized missionaries, lay people, religious, priests, to go all over the world to defend the dignity of the human person and to give their lives and their efforts in aid for the sake of that dignity. Now, talking about justice, justice is what corresponds to each person. Justice is when we give each one what belongs to them, not according to our own templates, but according to the fullness of their reality. Now, theories of social contract and market and self-interest are helpful to explain some dynamics. But if we pretend to reduce human experience to them, they're highly misleading. Even cultural diversity will sometimes focus on the more colorful aspects, but not recognize or respect the faith that is at the core of those cultures. Now, Pope John Paul II spoke about human ecology, and he defined it as the environment that a human person needs to develop and be fulfilled in a healthy way. An environment that not only provides the basics for development, but is also not physically or morally toxic. An environment that allows the freedom of conscience to be able to seek truth and the freedom to love and be loved. So justice requires this human ecology, that we give each person the environment they need to thrive and be fulfilled. So it's therefore against justice that and inhuman that there are people that do not even have the basics that allow them to live with dignity. It is against justice and inhuman that those who have more resources are not willing to do whatever it takes to share them with those in need. It demeans their own dignity to neglect or deny their vocation to love, serve, when having the capacity, they fail to do so. When so-called developed societies, in the name of freedom, explain away or deny their people's duty to virtue and the duty to help those in need, they are betraying their human nature and frustrating their own fulfillment. It is inhuman that millions do not have the resources of water, food, energy, and education to live in dignity, but often it is not their choice. On the other side of the equation, it is inhuman that millions actually choose moral misery and frustration by denying to themselves their own duty and opportunity to love, to care, and to give to those in need. Every human person has a right and a need for food, drinkable water, basic instruction, elementary health care, and energy adequate for their development. The environment is God's gift to everyone, and in our use, we have a responsibility towards the poor, towards future generations, and towards humanity as a whole. Pope Benedict, in his recent document, Charity and Truth, stated that specifically on energy, there's a pressing moral need for renewed solidarity so that countries lacking those resources can have access to them. And I have the red card, so I'm going to finish. It is not enough to give money and technology. We have to be involved personally. It is my experience that when universities form people, young people, for this task, the results are excellent. In one of our first missions, a college student from Bowdoin, Maine, were developing actually this playground in a shanty town in Lima. Perplexed by a carefree boy expressing much joy, he asked, "Why are you so joyful?" And his answer was, "You came." That testimony of somebody traveling so many miles to give something of themselves really infused joy and hope into this little kid. So love and faith are contagious. They can help us transform the world.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. William Boyd. Dr. Boyd was until recently a practicing attorney with a large, very prestigious national law firm headquartered in Washington, D.C., and more recently he became a member of the faculty here at Colorado Law last year, I understand. So I'll now turn the podium over to Dr. Boyd.
Can I just close this?
No, don't close it.
Oh, don't
Just leave
close
it
it?
open. We'll just take this down.
There's a stray watch up here.
That's fine. Obviously, it doesn't work.
Love is timeless.
So I don't have anything as earthy or uplifting as the last two presentations. I'm going to have to talk about climate policy architecture, I'm afraid. Let me say thanks to Lakshman for putting on this amazing conference. Thanks to Justice Zabrowski, to the students, Mariah, Elise, Josh, and others, to the CEAS team, and all the speakers who came so far. I'm really honored to be part of this event. I don't have PowerPoint. This is a low-carbon presentation. And I want to just talk about three things. I want to talk about the international climate discussions, such as they are. and the current status of and prospects for more serious engagement with energy justice as we've been talking about it over the last couple of days. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of energy justice and some possible reframings of the concept that might get it a bit more traction in some of these discussions. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about alternative or parallel ways to leverage carbon finance for energy justice, picking up on some of the conversations from the previous topic, particularly in terms of opportunities in emerging U.S. greenhouse gas compliance regimes. So let's talk about the international climate regime. Copenhagen and beyond, obviously. It is a road that is cobbled, as Lakshman said yesterday, and it's clearly going to go right through Copenhagen and on beyond that. Where do we stand? I think the prospects for an agreement in Copenhagen are minimal. Maybe we'll be surprised, but right now it looks like a bit of a stalemate. The U.S. and other developed countries are demanding that big developing countries step up and take commitments. Developing countries are saying, show us the money. This is deja vu all over again. We've seen this before. The U.S. is also saying, I think as a matter of fact, just brute political fact, that we can't agree to anything until Congress acts. That is the domestic cap-and-trade system that Congress ultimately passes, we hope, will set the limits to what we can agree to internationally. That's the lesson of Bert Hagel, and that's a lesson that we have to live with. So there's not much happening in terms of the next couple of months. The draft negotiating text is still quite long. The last time I checked, it was over 180 pages long with almost everything in brackets. Yesterday, the Secretary released a list of non-papers by various contact groups, and that, I think, is not illustrated to sort of belittle the process at all, but just as a sign of how far we have to go. We have a long way to go before we get an agreement that 192 nations can agree to. What about energy justice in terms of where we are? Those words never appear in the text, and I would argue that the concept is largely missing from the document and from the process. Justice is actually mentioned twice in the draft text. Fairness is mentioned once. Fair distribution is mentioned once. Equity is mentioned 16 times, but every time in the context of common but differentiated responsibilities. I'll come back to that in a moment. Security is mentioned 7 times, but 6 times in the context of food security. Interestingly, there's no mention of energy services in the text, and there's no mention of energy poverty. Now, that's a very impressionistic survey. It's hardly scientific. I certainly can't claim to have read all 180 pages of the negotiating text, but again, this is a sign of how far we have to go in framing the concept and getting it into the climate policy discussions. Now, the concept itself, of course, we can look at the entire debate over common but differentiated responsibilities as a core principle of the Convention on Climate Change and in the current discussions over a new climate treaty as a debate over climate justice, and maybe indirectly as a debate about energy justice. The argument is fairly straightforward. The rich countries have appropriated the very high-quality fossil hydrocarbon endowment of the planet, and in the process they've appropriated the atmosphere as a sink for the emissions associated with building a very wealthy hydrocarbon society, leaving much of the rest of humanity with low-quality energy, a degraded atmosphere, not to mention other ecological disruption and stunted development. So the international climate regime, which is based in part on norms such as polluter pays, seeks to rectify the externalities associated with the appropriation of fossil hydrocarbons and a fair bit of live carbon in forests and other land-based ecosystems, but really does nothing to rectify the appropriation itself. This is an artifact, I think, of a policy built on emissions rather than one built on energy, equity, and development. And I would argue a failure in some ways to articulate a concept of energy justice capable of getting traction in the debate. Now, that failure is nobody's fault, obviously. This is a fairly new concept, a quite powerful concept pioneered by Lakshman and others, but it needs more bite in terms of the current debate. It needs more bite to get more traction. It needs to be, I think, situated more within the notion of capabilities, some of what we've heard over the last couple of days within the notion of energy services, the whole idea of enhancing freedom and development. The point is that this is not just about the ideal just social arrangement a la John Rawls. It's about a more pragmatic move to start to measure what is working and what is not in terms of improving people's lives and enhancing capabilities. We need more Amartya Sen, more Lakshman Guruswamy, and less John Rawls. But I think the most important reframing that we really need here, and this may reflect my own background in working in Washington for too long, is that we need to be talking about this in terms of how it actually promotes and enhances the interests of people in the United States and other wealthy industrialized countries. I'll come back to that in a minute, and I think a capabilities approach starts to build on that. So let me say a little bit about alternative and parallel approaches. We can and we should ask, if climate policy is the optimal place to pursue energy justice. But my view is that this is the only real game in town right now. You play the hand you're dealt. Politics is the art of the possible, so where do we go from here? The prospects for an agreement in December, again, are slim to none. Even if we get an agreement in 2010, it's not clear how much bite it will have. I'm skeptical that we'll end up with something that looks like Kyoto and includes the U.S. as a party. But assume we do get a meaningful agreement in 2010, can we create within that agreement mechanisms to develop real financing for energy justice and to leverage the private sector? What would that look like? What are some of the options? Well, we've heard about an enhanced and focused or refocused CDM targeted at the energy poor. That seems doable in terms of getting language into a text. You could have ODA commitments. You could have a set-aside of assigned amount units. Those are the allocations of assigned amounts to all of the parties that take commitments. You could set aside a portion of that for energy justice activities. You could have a tax on emissions trading or CDM or joint implementation such as the current tax on CDM for adaptation. You could fold this into nationally appropriate mitigation actions, or NAMAs as they're called. But we should recognize that there are significant questions about what CDM will look like in a post-2012 agreement. We should recognize there are serious questions about the viability of the Kyoto architecture as a whole, in part because of U.S. objections to Kyoto. There are questions about how much cap countries are willing to give up in terms of a set-aside of AAUs or a tax. ODA has always been a bit disappointing, and NAMAs really mean nothing unless you have some combination of the financing options that we talked about above. So a more likely outcome, it seems to me, at least over the medium term, is that we end up with a series of linked greenhouse gas compliance systems, some of which may be part of an international system and others of which may be independent. A U.S. system, an EU ETS, Japan, Australia, Canada, perhaps others, that are in specific ways linked to developing countries through specific windows or what you might call docking stations. And we already see that in the draft legislation. I'll come to that very quickly. So the key lesson here, I think, is that we should be focusing, yes, on CDM reform, yes, on the international architecture, but we should also be focusing on the design of these national and regional greenhouse gas compliance systems. And particularly that in the U.S. because we're in the window right now. And I think that's a very important and potentially powerful way to accomplish some of the objectives of the energy justice agenda, again, from the top down, not to in any way take away from the importance of all the bottom-up efforts. Two examples, and then I'll close. One, allowance set-asides. Both the House and the Senate bills take a portion of total allowances that are allocated under the overall cap, and they devote them to international adaptation and clean technology transfer. In the chairman's mark of the Senate bill that was released by the committee staff last night, that allocation is 2% of total allowances through 2021, and then it rises to 4% and then to 8%. If that survives, this is real money, right? 2% of allowances in the early years is about 100 million tons a year. At $10 a ton, that's $1 billion a year. So for comparison purposes, U.S. workers get about 1.5% of allowances. Reduced emissions from tropical deforestation get 5% of allowances. Allowance set-asides are a zero-sum game. This is treacherous political territory. There are lots of demands and lots of pressure on these set-asides, but this whole category of international adaptation and clean technology transfer is largely undefined right now. Many people have designs on it. Some effective lobbying might be able to push some of this toward energy justice activities. Two, offsets. Offsets are public enemy number one for foes of cap and trade. They make lots of people squeamish. There's plenty of potential for an ill-defined offsets program to undermine the integrity of the cap. We've known this for a long time, but there will almost certainly be offsets in any climate bill that passes the U.S. Congress. And there may be substantial amounts of international offsets. The House bill has 1 billion tons of international offsets. The Senate bill has 500 million tons of international offsets. And those numbers can actually go up if domestic offsets don't materialize. Almost done. Now, there's a strong preference, and some might read it as a requirement for sector-based approaches here. And the only category that's separately defined right now is offsets from reduced emissions for deforestation. There's no reason why you couldn't get some language, and we're really talking about a couple of sentences here, that define some specific offset categories or activities relevant to energy justice, say improved cook stoves for a small portion of the international offsets pool. You'll need a lot of backup analysis to do that, a lot of support, a lot of political push to make that happen. But if you're successful in doing that, it sends a very powerful signal to the private sector that this is real and that this is going to be part of an emerging U.S. greenhouse gas compliance system. Two things to look out for: double counting. To the extent that you create an offsets category intended to reward CO2 reductions from reduced fuel wood use, and at the same time you're crediting reduced emissions from deforestation, you could have a double counting problem. If you're doing the deforestation accounting at the national level, that's going to have to be nested and reconciled. Two, MRV, or monitoring, reporting, and verification. You tell me, some of the last panel can talk about this, if we can do the MRV at a scale for activities intended to improve energy services and reduce CO2 at the household level, such as cook stoves. More important, is it possible to bundle or aggregate these activities into some sort of sectoral program which might get more traction and might make the MRV a bit more manageable? It seems to me difficult to do. So to conclude, how do you make this happen? One word: lobby. It's a dirty word. It's a blood sport. I've done it. It can be degrading. It's a lot easier if you're doing it on something you believe in. And there are plenty of lobbyists for hire out there. But most importantly, it is the system we have, whether you like it or not. And without it, even the best ideas and the most noble objectives will not make it into the legislation. You need a campaign for energy justice that can coordinate all of the messages that we've had over the last 2 days and get it to your average Midwestern Democratic senator, get them to buy into it. Moral arguments, environmental arguments, political arguments, public health arguments, economic arguments. You have to be able to convince the American people that this is somehow in their interest, and it's in their interest to use climate policy as a tool to facilitate energy justice. If you can't answer that question, then I don't think it's going to happen.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd. That was a lot of territory you covered there. Our next speaker is Doug Vilsack. Doug's an attorney with the firm of Davis, Graham & Stubbs nearby here in Denver. Some of you may have seen his BOGO lights on display upstairs earlier. If you're lucky, you may still have a few of them available. I bought 2 of them yesterday. Doug Vilsack.
See if I can find my slides. So I guess I can kind of just start talking before my slides show up. I was sitting over here trying to think, what am I doing up here as I was waiting for that presentation to end, and I was starting to think back to when I first went to Namibia, and kind of the reason why I'm here is more or less that I fell in love with Namibia about 5 years ago when I first went over there to volunteer for the World Wildlife Fund. So I think if you can take anything from what I'm saying here today, it's really about trying to find a place in the world that you really kind of hold dear, and I think a lot of people in this room probably have that. And then once you get a sense for the culture and once you kind of figure out what's going on the ground, really taking some of the technologies and some of the work other people have done and trying to implement it. And I think as long as you have a really good idea of the culture and have worked with people before, you can really accomplish great things. So this is Namibia. This is where Elephant Energy, nonprofit that I started, work. We work up in the very far northeastern corner in partnership with the World Wildlife Fund, an organization who I started volunteering for in Namibia about 5 years ago. Namibia is a pretty amazing country. Tremendous wildlife resources, tremendous mineral wealth, fisheries, decent agricultural land if you can irrigate it, amazing renewable energy resources, some of the best solar resources in the world. So you have this incredible country, only 2 million people in a country twice the size of Texas. So if you look at a country like this, you can really see the opportunity for Africa if you can get investment and people kind of away from that idea that Africa is a backwards place and it's some place that we don't want to work in because you can't work with the people there. This is the far northeast, the Comprega region. I'll explain a little bit to you what the WWF does and how what Elephant Energy does works in with what they do. Basically, this is a map of a number of local conservation organizations that were started by the WWF about 15 years ago. And basically what they do is they do anti-poaching work, community-based anti-poaching work. And once the community takes control over natural resources and wildlife and can show that they can actually basically reduce poaching and promote conservation, then the government gives back to them what was traditionally theirs, which is the rights over wildlife and over any sort of tourism that goes on in the area. So all these little conservancies, the blue ones, are registered conservancies with the government, and they each have their own constitutions and local representative bodies that are managing the funding coming in from trophy hunting and tourism, which in many cases is quite a substantial amount of money. This area is home to about 30,000 elephants that pass through every year, which is really far too many elephants, and it's very destructive on a lot of the river corridors and a lot of the trees in the area. And in this area, there's a very, very small amount of trophy hunting that occurs. And that amount of trophy hunting can basically provide as much as $100,000 US to each of these small little conservancies. So in terms of thinking about funding and thinking about ways to promote renewable energy, as I started working with these conservancies, this was a homegrown source of kind of African funding that could be tapped if you can encourage communities to actually adopt some of this technology to really work in these areas. So this is just an example what's going on in the area with tourism, what the World Wildlife Fund has done there. And so the conservancies provide all sorts of different benefits. Cash from tourism, meat distributions. If animals are killed, the meat goes to the communities. Lots of jobs and training coming out of the conservancies to do anti-poaching, to do natural resource management, to teach people how to produce baskets. There's a wildlife insurance scheme, so if your cattle gets killed, you can get paid about half the price of your cattle by the conservancy. Problem animal management, if there is a dangerous elephant or something like that in the area, it can be dealt with, and lots of community projects. So there are conservancy benefits, but one of the problems is that the money comes into the conservancy and the people that are associated with the conservancy monopolize the benefits. And so because everybody in the community is dealing with this increase in wildlife, basically through their crops getting knocked over by more elephants or cattle killed or all sorts of different reasons, people get killed by elephants as well. There has to be a way to take all these benefits and distribute them broadly. So back to this, we all know about this. We've been talking about it all week. The difficulties of doing sort of infrastructure development and doing energy development in Africa. So I had gone to Namibia 3 or 4 times to work for the World Wildlife Fund in these conservation programs. And after that and during that time had worked with CEAS here at CU, and is actually my 3rd year at CU, was sitting around in a meeting with these guys talking about this type of technology and about how we could basically do research to see what sorts of technology we could take to the developing world. And Barbara was actually in one of those meetings, and she showed me a BOGO light. And so I was kind of sitting there and was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I got a couple. And then as the year progressed, you kind of get near the end of your 3rd year, and you start studying for the bar, and it gets a little boring sometimes. So I just started thinking about different ways that we could use some of these technologies in Namibia. And one day I was sitting around at another meeting talking about these technologies. And just decided I was going to go back to Namibia and drag a big bag of these things down there and see what happened. So I bought a plane ticket actually during that meeting and ended up going back after I took the bar for a month with a bag of 50 of these lights that were funded by all my buddies in law school and at Colorado College and all sorts of different places. And went down and basically distributed 2 to each of the conservancies. Basically, with the idea that they needed to test them out, using them for anti-poaching work, using them for all sorts of different things that they would do. And established a survey system to see how those lights were actually affecting people's lives. So that was the start, and I came back, started working at Davis Graham & Stubbs down in Denver, who's been very, very good to me in terms of letting me do this type of stuff and also letting me be a lawyer at the firm as well. So those were kind of some of the starts, and I've gone through some of that. So at this point in time, we have 2 other law students who actually graduated last year down in Namibia. They've been down there for about 6 months. We've worked through the conservancies. At this point in time, 2 of the conservancies that were more excited about this. Through one conservancy distributing 100 lights, through another distributing 200, and these are lights that were purchased by the conservancy and then distributed in lieu of cash that they would have given out, which actually has caused a tremendous amount of problems in terms of just handing cash out to people who don't usually get that kind of cash. So we've done that, and then we're actually moving to a larger conservancy next, and I've got 800 lights on a boat that are missing somewhere in the ocean, and 300 lights that are also coming down on a plane if those don't get there in time, and we're going to do a distribution of about 400 lights basically to every household in this one conservancy area. So basically it's taking the funding from wildlife and putting it back into something that can go to everybody in the community. So, you know, lights were the first step, and I've kind of gone through some of this. Lights were the first step. I've also taken some of Brian Wilson's cook stoves down there, different kinds of lights, cell phone chargers. We're just trying all sorts of different things. And so I guess just as kind of a thesis of all of this, it's just, you know, the ability for everybody in this room, whether you're a student or somebody that also has another job, to really go do something like this if you have a place that you love in the developing country or even in the United States, and take some of this technology and really promote it in your spare time, which sometimes it takes a lot of spare time, and really do some pretty cool stuff and change people's lives. So.
Thank you, Doug. Our next speaker is Sarah Barker Ball. Sarah's a third-year student at the University of California Law School at Berkeley, and she's co-president of the Berkeley Energy and Resources Collaborative. I see here that she's scheduled to join the Bingham McCutcheon firm upon her graduation next year. I can tell you that's a very fine firm and quite prestigious in California, and she must have done well in law school to get a job there. So I congratulate you on that, and I'll turn the podium now over to Ms. Barker Ball.
Thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the role that students can play in really getting active. I really have loved law school and I love going to classes, but I realized after about my first month there that if I was going to spend the whole time just dealing with casebooks and other people's footnotes, that I'd be wasting a really precious time. So I got very heavily involved with a group that was pretty new at the time and has now really taken off, called the Berkeley Energy and Resources Collaborative, or BERC, and really focus on fostering student innovation and action. We don't think about education as just a time to be trained to do something later, but really as school and college and graduate schools in particular has been a phenomenal time. You're very busy, but you're also very flexible. Your labor is very cheap, and you have amazing access both to campus resources and to a wide number of resources out in the community, in the industry, and government. When you just pick up the phone and call and just say you're a student associated with X university, they'll actually listen to you, whereas if you're associated with some company or something, it's a lot harder to avoid that immediate click. So this is just a very quick overview of BERC and what we are. We're fully interdisciplinary. It was started by business students, but now we have 2,000 members listed on this, but our last count was in the summer, and we get several new memberships a day. About somewhere between a half and 2/3 of those are current students. The rest are alumni, community members, industry members. And so our goal is to connect, to educate, and engage in order to foster innovation and action. We do this on a number of different fronts. We've always been a very entrepreneurial organization in that we try to keep a very flexible budget, both time and money, so that when students have great ideas, we think of ourselves as an incubator. They can come in, we sort of foster them, let them get off the ground and get going, and help them find an institutional partner to make sure that it stays long term. I think the hardest thing about student groups and student action is the really high turnover time and a very short institutional memory. And so we try to work within that very short time frame and have to be flexible. But on the other hand, it can be an extreme advantage to be on such a time frame. As I heard earlier today, where there's, universities can have a tremendous role in solving energy justice issues and a number of other social justice and just social issues in general, but it's very hard to do, and they're very stuck in bureaucratic models. And students get to kind of mix and mingle within that and don't have to be caught in some of the same red tape. So in our model of sort of incubating student projects, our goal is we take things in, we foster them, give them money and support, and then only after that do we sort of give it to the university and allow them to take it over. So we realize that we can be a lot quicker in doing it. So in addition to doing a number of events and programs, conferences, and symposia, we have now 5 sort of key programs that really focus on letting students get their hands dirty right away. A couple of them I'll just go over real quick, and 2 of them which have a much more focus and an overlap with energy justice issues I'll talk about in a little more depth. So we have a consulting program where interdisciplinary groups of students get matched with an external client. Some of those are startup companies, some of those are nonprofits, and some are government entities, so far state government. And just working on, we say consulting, we use that pretty broadly. It can be any number of problems that they're facing. We worked with the California State Senate in helping to develop some aspects of a high-speed rail project, which was passed by California voters a year and a half ago, but has a long way to go to actually get off the ground. Working with a nonprofit right now that's dealing with methane digesters on dairies in California, but running into a number of permitting issues. They have the money, they have the technology, and they can't get the permits. And so figuring out some of the policy and business barriers and how to overcome those. So our program SEED, Students for Environmental Energy Development, is education outreach. We teach at pretty poor neighborhoods in the East San Francisco Bay Area, and just get in there, and after school programs are in elementary and middle school right now, and hope to go to high school next year, and just get students really excited by this field in general. Last year we did an energy curriculum, this year we're doing water conservation, and it's all hands-on, very project-oriented. We don't ask of the school anything besides a time and a little bit of a framework. We come in with all the resources, all the projects, and it's been hugely successful. We have a number of schools that are asking us to come back, and it's just as soon as we find the time with our own class schedules, we'll be expanding that. I'm going to skip over the IRA because I'm going to come back to that. Berkeley Energy Connections is just, it's a little bit of an ambiguous project right now, but we have the very distinct advantage of having a national lab sit on our back door, and we've worked with them in a number of capacities, but are realizing that as close in proximity as we are, their Environmental Energy Technologies division is not very good at tapping into the campus resources to the fullest capacity. So we're just trying to work with them in different ways to get student resources up at the lab, and in return, share in the amazing research that they're doing. This is our newest program that we just started this year. We're partnering with an organization that's based in Canada called Investors Beyond Borders. And it's a cross between a case competition, which is very typical in business schools, and a business plan competition. But unlike most business plan competitions or case competitions, it's focused on a developing market. So teams will form in the spring, and they'll be given a specific real-world actual country that is going to frame the case, and they're going to figure out the best technology and the best business strategy in order to implement a real renewable energy technology into a developing market. And the winners will be working with some core members of that country's government to actually get to implement their project on the ground and have some money and resources in order to do that. And so other project, our first fully incubated project, in that we got this off the ground. It was such a success that the Haas School of Business sort of stole it from us, which is great because they have a lot of money. And so we still help them by sending them students, but no longer have to do the administrative burden of it. And the model is that we match interdisciplinary teams, again, with technology that's coming originally out of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, but we also work with a number of technologies now that are coming out of UC Berkeley proper, in order to find commercialization paths. And we have both developed and developing world technologies. A couple of them were developed by Ashok Gadgil, who spoke earlier in the conference. We've had a couple cook-stove designs, as also we had arsenic removal from water for Pakistan mostly, and a number of biofuels technologies that are have low land use implications and have potential developing world markets. And so I guess the long and the short is that I think interdisciplinary interactions are really key. The being siloed in any one discipline, I think, is very limiting. And I think that students have such key advantages for such a short period of time that learning to cross the border of your own specific school or department and work with everyone else around you on incredible campuses such as Boulder's can get things done sometimes a whole lot faster than just working in the bounds of the university proper. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And our next speaker is Dr. Evan Thomas. Dr. Thomas is an aerospace engineer who works on sustainable development and appropriate technology programs. He's the Executive Vice President of Mana Energy Limited. He came here from his office in Houston. Dr. Thomas.
So I had a completely different presentation until lunchtime today. And the reason is with the privilege of speaking last, I got to hear over the past 2 days a number of presentations on the bottom-up technology development and implementation, and I had a presentation just like that about our water treatment systems and our own cook stoves. We've heard a lot about those. And we've also heard a lot about the challenges associated with integrating that work with the clean development mechanism and with carbon credits. And some of it appears to be very challenging and disheartening with the way that the Copenhagen meeting is turning out to be. And I just want to present what we're up to, which I think actually brings us closer to that breakthrough in tying together humanitarian development with the carbon market faster than we might think. I'm an aerospace engineer at NASA in Houston. I work on sustainable life support systems for Moon and Mars spacecraft, which is largely similar to developing sustainable life support for people on Earth. The only difference is we don't have gravity to help us out when we're on Mars, or we do actually, but in Mars transit. This is one slide of 100 I had before, but our particular technology is surface water treatment. We do gravity-fed gravel flocculators, rapid sand filters, and photovoltaic-powered ultraviolet disinfection systems for rural communities in Rwanda. We started this work as Engineers Without Borders here at the University of Colorado. We became frustrated at how through the charity model, it was difficult to maintain sustainability with the existing projects. And you would raise money for one project, install it, move on, and these projects would slowly die. And that's a challenge Professor Amade identified, and it's been talked about here. So we wanted to find a way to have more economic sustainability associated with our programs. Social enterprise is what we are trying to do. Government and charity work, as I mentioned, funds discrete projects where there's little money for long-term operation and maintenance. Instead, social enterprise can break this trend by directly tying revenues to the actual intent of the work. So rather than getting a donation for one project, moving on, finding new money for the next project, if your existing projects are funding your next ones, you're incentivized to make sure that they're working. We've talked a lot about carbon credits, and this picture showed up enough times today that I was advised to turn it upside down. But the clean development mechanism deliberately excludes forestation projects. The reason that it's been so tough, the reason we've identified so many challenges that have been talked about is CDM was never supposed to include firewood as a way of getting carbon credits. What we're doing is applying the concepts of suppression of demand and right to develop, which are buzz terms, but basically it means that in Africa, where there's no appreciable electricity use to speak of, we're now able to assume that there's a demand for that energy use. And when we put in a technology that suppresses that demand, we can claim carbon credits on that hypothetical suppressed energy use. Now, I know that might seem really sketchy, but we didn't make it up, so talk to the UN about it. What we do is apply that concept to water treatment. Every liter of water that we treat with our water treatment systems is a liter of water that no longer has to be boiled with firewood. We demonstrate a baseline between 51 and 74% of Rwandans do boil at least a little bit of their water every day. We put in water treatment systems, and we're able to claim credits on up to 20 liters per person per day. As I mentioned, CDM deliberately excluded non-renewable biomass at first, and through I'm an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, so I get pretty confused sometimes with how this works, but basically we're still excluding firewood. We don't assume firewood's being used. We assume that once the firewood has been used up, people have to switch to kerosene. So all of our carbon credits actually tie back to kerosene use. This This methodology was approved by the UN over 2 years ago, but there has not yet been a single project that is actually successfully registered with it. People talk about it, the UN talks about it, it's been talked about, at least in the ether in this conference, over and over again. There has not been a single project to use compliant CDM for firewood use. And as a result, all the other projects so far, the cook stoves projects have been discussed, are in the voluntary market, which is great. However, it's not as solid as being part of the compliance market, where people are buying and selling credits not to make people feel good and for PR reasons, but because they have to by law. And if we are registered by December or January, which we've been doing this for 2 years and we're in the validation process right now, so within a few weeks really we should know, we'll be the first qualifying project for firewood suppression. And our initial, I put this in not really to toot our own horn, but to tell you that this is actually really happening. We have funding from the Global Water Challenge, which came via the Clinton Global Initiative and the UN Foundation, and we've lined up about $2 million in investment from Acumen Fund, the Calvert Foundation, both of which are two of the biggest social investment firms in the world, and Grey Ghost, which is actually much more of a diverse portfolio, but they also have an interest in sustainable social enterprise. And then the Swedish Energy Agency, good old Swedes, are purchasing 100% of our generated carbon credits to meet their own treaty obligations. This isn't, they feel good about it, they are advertising the humanitarian benefits, but in reality, they need to buy and sell carbon credits to meet their treaty obligations. They are buying 100% of our credits at fixed prices for 10 years. So even in the worst case scenario that Copenhagen flushes everything down the toilet, the Swedes are still on the hook for 10 years. So they obviously feel good enough to do that. And then we work directly with the national government of Rwanda to implement and monitor these projects. This is a new development model. We're not the first to do it with social enterprise, but it's definitely an emerging method to do humanitarian development. And the reason it's exciting is that there's now a direct incentive to ensure accountability with your projects. Your funding is coming from your existing projects. If our water treatment systems fail, we don't just walk away from them or leave them alone for a couple years to try to raise money from Rotary clubs again. We instead are incentivized to use our profit to go back and maintain those systems. So even if we're taken over by the most cynical businessmen and women, or lawyers, they are still motivated to maintain those systems. Our full project that we have committed to, which now I kind of regret committing to such a big number, but it's 400 water treatment systems and 300 biogas generators across Rwanda that will ultimately impact over 1/3 people. And projected revenues are over $102 million over the 14-year lifespan of the project. And we repay our debt, we pay back Acumen, they see a profit, the Swedes see a profit, or they at least see a compliance with their treaty obligations, and then we use profit to then expand and replicate this model. We never have to take out loans again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Now, in our schedule, we have a few minutes available now, maybe 6 or 8 minutes, to take a few questions before I call on Dr. Guruswamy. Is there anyone who has a question to direct to a member of our panel here? You have a question? You're just Here, Mariah, we have a question.
I have one for Jonah. So what's your carbon play with biochar? And then I have another one.
There's a voluntary standard that's written basically on reduced methane emissions, taking waste biomass that would otherwise decomp and pyrolyzing it. It's called Carbon Gold, and that's the first voluntary standard written, and it's still in comment period. I think the most viable path forward with biochar and carbon valuation is you can actually weigh the solid carbon coming out of your system. And while it would be great to get value for suppression of wood demand, etc., the fact that you can weigh that solid carbon seems promising to me.
Okay, thanks. And then for the recovering lobbyist, I have a quick question. You mentioned, is it ODAs and NAMAs? I don't know what that means.
I'm sorry, ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. aid, bilateral aid, multilateral aid, and NAMAs are nationally appropriate mitigation actions. Sorry about that.
Other questions? Who else has a question?
Well, first, I want to thank Lakshman for pulling together such a great conference. I'm up at CSU, and it's always a challenge for me to come down to see you. My question, the title for this panel was The Way Forward, and we heard ideas of ways of moving things forward. But my challenge for this conference is conferences do a lot of conferring, but they don't do a lot more than that. And so I would challenge all of you, if you're students, to make projects out of energy justice in your classes, and professors to introduce the topic of energy justice in your classes, and companies to donate to one of these worthy ventures up here. Any of you want to give any more contact information for the donations? There's a question.
Okay, other questions here in front.
A question for Sarah. Are you trying to network with universities in developing countries and seed, I would say, the same sort of initiative, enthusiasm, and business incubation as what you seem to be doing out of your organization? I think one of the challenges in the developing world is the demographic profile in developing countries, where you have a very large young population and very few business opportunities. And I think linking up with them, maybe, or with youth, I think there's an organization called Youth for Youth International or something like that, you know, could trigger a lot of additional business to you all.
Well, so two parts. One, we're working really closely with MIT, and they developed sort of an umbrella organization called the Collegiate Energy Association, maybe Alliance, CEA, that started with just United States companies, but we've done a really big push over the last 6 to 8 months to really start branching out to trying to find clubs are pretty loosely defined. Sometimes it's just 2 students at a school. But we have now some in Europe, some in about 6 in Asia over the last about 6 months. And really starting to work with them to kind of trickle this network out. And we do a lot. We have a conference call every few weeks to just start sharing best practices, help each other explain what we've done, what we found has worked, working on projects that we can collaborate on across borders. So it's definitely a need that we see and that we're starting to address on that front. And then in Berk specifically, we have about a 20-person leadership team that spans about 15 different departments and schools, and some of them have functional roles in making the organization work. Some are liaisons to other parts of the campus. And then in the transition, we'll be transitioning over our team in about a month. And we've developed 2 new roles for exactly that. One is going to be working with China specifically because we have a number of connections with 2 prominent universities in China to be working with them and just kind of share some of the stuff that we've done. And then I was on a trip last year that was hosted in Portugal, but had representatives of students, graduate students doing energy work from 40 different countries. And I've been working with 2 of the people that I met there in Mozambique to kind of help them get some stuff going. So it's slow, but we're starting.
Okay, now I have one last question for the panel here, and that is, how many of you are going to be at the pizza and beer later?
Plan to be.
Okay, a number of them are going to be at the pizza and beer later. That's all the time we have for questions now, but as you see, most of the panelists will be at the pizza and beer, and you can follow up on some of your questions there. And now I have the pleasure of calling on Dr. Guruswamy. I don't think he needs any introduction.
Thank you very much for being here. We've been surrounded by some magnificent people. Some of them have gone, some of them are here. Those of you who are here, would you please turn to each other and say, I'm so pleased you are here. Would you turn around and say, you're so pleased you are here? Because this is, thank you, thank you. I mean, it is wonderful to have everybody here. And I kind of feel that I am the sort of general who reads from the rear of the regiment, and it's just terrific that so many people have come here and made this the event that it has been. I'm standing between this magnificent performance that you're going to see when Beth is out there and the reception.
It's raining, so Adrian.
Oh, it's here? It's raining? What's the matter with the rain? Can't it stop? Okay. All right, Mariah, can you stop it? Because Mariah does everything. I'm just thinking she can stop the rain too. But anyway, I just want to distill in about a few minutes some of the main points that I see coming out. May I take up the point that was made? This does, it's all great to sit and listen to talks, but the next step is, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And in order to go from here, what we have tried to do is merely to facilitate a meeting between the great people. Many of them are my heroes, who've been working in the field sometimes for 20 and 25 years. I am overwhelmed. I'm just here, and I can only say in awe, thank you for all that you've done. You've made contact with them, they have made contact amongst themselves, and what we would like to do is to facilitate their taking this to the next stage. And they can take this to the next stage by the interactions we've tried to do this in a discreet way to facilitate stuff between them. But we at SEAS are no more than the bow that ties the flowers together. We can only do that. And what we will do is to try and contact you individually, severally, and see how we can go forward. I just want to make two or three points here in how we might proceed forward. The purpose of this conference was to focus on the energy-oppressed poor. That's the miserable 2 billion people. Miserable not because they are wonderful human beings, as Jose has pointed out, but the misery inflicted on them is such that we want to focus on what is right and just for them. I don't care whether you want to call it justice or equity or fairness, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we bring attention to bear on their plight. And one of the things that came across is that in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa particularly, what is the matter with this great machine called the CDM if there are no credits being made possible for those in Africa? Now, clearly CDM is in need of radical rewriting. Now, of course, there is not much carbon emitted in Africa. So if you're thinking of just giving credits for carbon emissions, I congratulate Mana Energy and a number of others who are trying to come within the rules of the game. But isn't it time that people around woke up and said, we've got to figure out a better way of compensating the energy-oppressed poor if they can help us solve the great problem of global warming. And so I think what's important here is to bring within the umbrella of CDM, you can call it whatever you want, but to understand that we probably need to reframe the agenda so that rather than go to the advanced developing countries and say, cut down carbon dioxide, you say to them, can you join us in combating both global poverty, energy poverty, as well as combating global warming? The response, I'm sure, of even the advanced developed countries, anybody around the world is going to say, yeah, let's try and do that. And what we have suggested is one easy way of doing that. And you saw Kirk Smith, he's a giant in the field. 37%, according to his figures, of the black carbon that is being emitted, that is the second or maybe the third biggest cause of global warming, is coming from these cook stoves. Now, we have to develop some kind of a mechanism. I don't care how it's done. We don't want to be too market-oriented in this. We've got to understand there's a problem, there's a solution. How do we get from the problem to the solution? And I think there ought to be some mechanism under CDM, and I don't care how we're going to rewrite this, to give credit to, particularly to African countries, where they may not be emitting carbon dioxide, but they are going to help in combating global warming. And I think that's one of the things that we should take the lead in trying to do. We have here at SEAS not been trying to promote anything other than the concept of justice. We'll work with everybody. If you want to work with us, we really embrace you. We have got some wonderful people who have come here, and we plan ask them to move forward with us in moving towards this concept of energy justice. One other thing that I want to leave you with, and I'm going to then stop, which is this, that we've talked a lot about cook stoves and indoor pollution. But cook stoves and indoor pollution is not the objective of energy justice. Energy justice looks to restoring human beings to their full potential. And that means that just because you don't die from respiratory ailments by breathing in that noxious air, it does mean that you have to die from bad drinking water, or tuberculosis, or malaria, or the other plethora of terrible diseases or pneumonia that afflict the rest of the world, the rest of the energy-oppressed poor. We think that we have to somehow, and I don't know how we're going to do it, but that's the next stage of this challenge. How does the concept translate into a cycle where, whether it be you start with cook stoves, or you start with safe drinking water, or you start with some kind of agricultural practices that promote the economic development, often led by women, of particular communities, how do we make them a community that grows sustainably? And you cannot grow sustainably just by having a cook stove. Of course, you can help them to have that cook stove, but you have to encourage some form of economic development. And that is not going to come, I don't think, just from market sources. People have mentioned this. It has to come from governments, intergovernmental agencies, foundations, and yes, markets. But let's keep in mind that what we are trying to do is really move that segment of the world into an arena which says we can offer you justice, and energy justice is just the beginning. As I say, I'm going to close there, but let me say, this has been, for me, such a humbling experience because we had so many great people who have been here. We had 40 speakers of the most wonderful in the world arrive around here. I must have sent 55 letters. That is an amazing acceptance rate. And I've written to so many great people, and they said, yeah, we're coming, because the subject seemed to resonate. But let me tell you, I'm just the figurehead. This conference was done, achieved, was executed by a marvelous group of students. And it is my pleasure to call upon Mariah. I just want to say, Mariah, with Elise, who she will now call upon, has done nothing short. I don't want to give the lily here. She's just done an amazing and phenomenal job. So Mariah, thank you very much, and it's been a wonderful conference. It's yours.
Thank you very much. I had a lot of help. And so I'd like to ask all of the students who helped me with this to just come up here so that we can recognize all of them. Elise and Josh and Tabor, Abby and Jessica and Courtney and Jocelyn and Jacqueline. Success without all of you coming here, so can we have a round of applause for all of you? Thank you so much for coming. We have one last treat for you, which is Miss Beth Osnes will be an interactive theater. Here she comes.
Wait, before that, really quickly, I would like to thank one more person who does so much behind the scenes. Candace!
I'm so sorry.
This woman is really amazing. You don't even understand.
manager at C's, and she has definitely worked with us till the end of the night, and I am so sorry. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, I want to reassure everyone that this will not go for the hour that it was scheduled. It'll be more like 10, 15 minutes. This is a vocal empowerment session, so that, as you said, when we leave here, we can really activate our voices to be continuing this conversation. We've all been informed, inspired, invigorated to go from this conference to be the spokespeople, the advocates, the educators, and the champions of energy justice. As we continue this conversation that we started here, may we continue to speak about this, as Lakshman would say, with anyone who has a dog in the race. And as we have learned from this conference, everyone has a dog in this race. So I'm co-founder of a grassroots movement called Mothers Acting Up. And what we invite mothers to do is to reimagine themselves and their roles to include advocacy for the world's children. So what I'm asking for you to do today is to reimagine yourselves and your role to include advocacy on behalf of energy justice. I'd like to use one of our poster children as an example. What does advocacy look like? We look to Lakshman. I think that advocacy really means stepping out of our comfortable circles to talk about this issue. Example here, Lakshman was recently in our Mothers Acting Up calendar. He doesn't usually appear in calendars, but he did in a mothering calendar, which is not his usual circle. And because of his presence in that calendar, I know that our guest in the very back row is here today because she read about the calendar, was moved by your personal story, and checked out your website, found out about this conference, and is here. And so there really are direct results that come from stepping outside your circle. Another example, Lakshman was telling his story on a TV show that Mothers Acting Up does on our local access television station, Channel 8, called The Moment Show. And he was on there and shared his story. He's really reaching a population that he wouldn't usually reach by stepping outside his comfort circles. Another example, I don't know if Dan and Virgil are still here. Are they? They probably left. There's Dan and Virgil right there. They gave a talk on getting it right, international development in the 21st century. They gave their talk within their building, which was, their comfort level. And now they're going to be stepping over to the theater building to give the same lecture to our students, which will be a very much different audience for them. Advocacy can look like writing a editorial for a newspaper. It can look like giving a talk to a faith community. It can look like writing a handwritten letter to your representative and faxing it to them. Through a partnership between Mothers Acting Up and the Philanthropies Foundation, I've been traveling to different parts of the world for the last 2.5 years, giving a vocal empowerment workshop primarily to mothers and others, anyone interested in exercising protective care over the world's children. We've really been trying to get people to move from concern to action on behalf of the world's children. That's really that little tricky thing. There's a whole lot of people who are concerned, very few people who act. I'm also a theater professor, and I realize that when I want people to act, that's asking them to step into a public role in an uncomfortable situation. It's hard to do, but we actors do it all the time. We are masters at knowing how, we have skills, we have confidence, and we have practice in using our voices in public. So this workshop aims to take the skills that I have from my background in theater and share it with people who would then become advocates for the things about which they are really concerned. By participating in just this brief portion of the workshop that I'm going to share with you today, you are joining into community with the people that I've given this workshop to, this same workshop. People in Vietnam, in Nashville, Panama, Toronto, Columbus, Austin, Malaysia, Guatemala, and beyond. So with that, I invite everyone to please arise, stand up. We're going to need to also, if you can, you're going to need to be able to be near someone if you could. We're going to go through the steps that we're going to use in order to empower our voices. One of the first steps is that tension blocks expression. Your entire body is your expressive instrument. If you have tension in your body, you are not going to be able to communicate very well. So I invite everybody to let your arms down to your side. Just give it a little shake out. This is going to feel good anyway. Shake it out. Feel that tension leaving your body. Whew, shake out the shoulders. Fantastic. You have to relax in order to be an effective person at expressing your voice. Next step after relaxation is full breath. Breath gives life to true expression. And we oftentimes, when we get a little nervous, we take these little shallow breaths right at the top of our lung capacity. Very ineffective. We want to just start imagining dropping it down using our full body as our expressive instrument. So I'm going to have everybody just stand on your feet parallel. Your feet are parallel. You're about a foot apart. You are relaxed. And you're just going to, you can close your eyes. It might help you to just focus. I'd like you to imagine that your torso is a wooden barrel. And that as you inhale, you are expanding this barrel to every side, front, back, sides. Just really engage your sensory imagination so that you're really feeling this expansion of your barrel. Also try to exhale almost completely. Use that breath completely so that you really feel a new breath rush in. We're being like athletes. We're trying to get that little bit of an advantage to be excellent at expression. Getting full breath will help this. Fantastic. Next thing that I'd like to invite you to consider is full voice. The best way to get a full voice is to trigger a yawn. Shouldn't be too hard for everybody to simulate a yawn at this point. Everybody just go ahead and do a yawn. Notice what happens to the back of your throat when you yawn. This time I'd like you to give a voice to it too. Like make it an audible yawn. Notice what happens. The back of your throat just opens up. We're going to do another, but we're going to keep it on a sustained ah sound. Letting in a breath. Ah. Good. I'm going to invite you to do that one more time. And I'd like you to have a heightened awareness of how your diaphragm and abdominal muscles have to kick in to support the sound when you really open up the back of the throat. Again, letting in a breath. Fantastic. The thing I want you to know is that your worst sensor is the muscles in the back of your throat. When you get emotional, when you talk about things about which you are really concerned about, emotions come in and we use the expression, you get choked up. These muscles choke you. So you're really conscientiously, the best friend you'll have is imagining that yawn in the back of your throat, opening up that passage so that your voice can come out from your full person, your full body. Great. And now we have one more step. We're going to keep each one of these and we keep upping the ante a little bit here. The final frontier in effective communication is authentic contact. So what I'm going to invite everybody to do here, Dominique will have to move a little, you're going to have to get a partner. Everybody get a partner. Stand across from your partner so that you're about an arm's length away. Everybody grab a partner, please. Everybody needs a partner. Great. Fantastic. Work it out. We should have an even number. Everybody has a partner? Great, great, great. Okay. I'd like you to establish authentic eye contact with your partner starting now. Unless a tornado rips through this room, maintain that eye contact. Grab an eye contact starting now. Let go of your need to talk. Just focus in on eye contact. Just let the talking fade away so you don't need to do it, so you can really focus. Good, it's hard, I know. Great. Everybody just... Okay. Okay, all right. Show mine! Everybody, I'm trying to use the arms thing. Everybody let go of the need to talk. Everybody's letting go of the need to talk, and you're really just focusing on authentic contact. Everybody's letting go of the need to talk. I'm gonna back up again now. Are you relaxed while you're making authentic contact? Whew, shake it out again. Good. Are you, okay, don't let talking back in. Are you letting in full breath while you're making authentic contact? Is your torso still a barrel, a wooden barrel that's expanding in every direction? And now are you able to still keep the back of your throat open and use a full voice while making authentic contact? I'm going to ask everyone to just say the words, we'll just do it, I will use my voice to advocate for energy justice. Everybody just say that with a big full voice and full breath. Everybody together to your partner, and I will use my voice to advocate for energy justice. Okay, stay there, stay there. Now what I'm going to challenge each person to do is I'd like everyone to come up with one authentic plan for action based on your concern for energy justice. One way within the next month that you plan to use your voice on behalf of energy justice. I'd like to invite that be outside of a circle of your usual comfort level. So it could be within your family, within your faith community, within whatever it is. So everybody think of one way that they will use their voice on behalf of energy justice. I'd like you to devise this really specific plan for action, and I'd like you to each share it with your partner. Whoever has the lighter shirt on, you go first. Whoever's wearing the lighter clothing, you go first and explain what your plan for action is, and then the other person go ahead and explain theirs. Don't get too bogged down with this. One person say it, and then the other person go ahead and say their plan.